Okay, welcome. Hello, happy Dalit History Month. Thank you all for being here today. Welcome to the Caste and Food panel. This is the third event in the Caste and Corporeality Conference, which will run until the end of May with online panels every Friday or almost every Friday. My name is Anusha Kedar. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Dance at UC Riverside. And co-organizer of this conference. Before I introduce my co-organizer, I wanted to share a bit about myself and my interest in these questions of caste and corporeality. I was raised in California in a middle-class Tamil Brahmin family and grew up learning Bharatanatyam, a dance form which I learned much later was appropriated from Bahujan woman by Brahmin elite in the mid-20th century. And I learned caste not explicitly, but implicitly through embodied practices, including food practices, as well as rituals and ways of being. And now as a dance scholar, I'm always curious and interested in thinking about the intersections of the body and power, how bodies are both disciplined and agentive, complicit and resistive. And my current research looks at the way in which caste is embodied and reproduced through dance performance and pedagogy. And I'll let my co-organizer introduce herself right now.
Hello everyone, my name is Samita Srivatsa and I'm a PhD student in the Critical Dance Studies program at the Department of Dance in UC Riverside, and I'm a co-organizer of this conference. I come from a South Indian Brahmin home and I acknowledge the ways in which it has enabled my career and shaped a lot of my attitudes towards everyday practices. I name my caste location in this conference for transparency and with openness to be held accountable. For my PhD research, I'm currently thinking about the ways in which the urban fields and ecosystems of Indian classical dance function like extensions of Brahmin households. I look at how the Indian state centers the cultural labor of female Savarna bodies as ideal bodies to reproduce Indian nation as an upper caste man's household. Anusha.
Yes, thank you, Samita. With this conference, we wanted to create a space to think alongside other scholars, artists, writers, poets, who are also engaged in questions related to caste and corporeality to understand how the body can be both a site of caste reproduction and caste violence, as well as a site of healing from caste oppression. We will just take a moment to recognize that this conference is happening at a time of genocide and political uprising. We stand in solidarity with Gaza and pro-Palestinian student movements happening across the United States. And we see these anti-caste efforts, including the work of our panelists today, as part of these wider interlocking struggles for liberation against oppression. Before Samita introduces the panelists, I want to quickly thank the University of California Humanities Research Institute, the Center for Ideas in Society at UC Riverside, UCR Department of Dance, and the UCR Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for their support. A special thanks to the team at the Center for Ideas in Society, Catherine, Jessica, Bianca for their technical support, and to the folks in the Performing Arts Administration, Marcelina, Melanie, Toya, and Brittany for their administrative support. And I'll pass it on to Samita to introduce the artists today and scholars.
So for today's panel, we have three very amazing artists and scholars. We have Rajyashri Goody, we have Sucharita Kanjilal, and Shri Vamsi Matta, who will speak about the intersection of caste and food in their work. Shri Vamsi Matta, or simply Vamsi, is a Bangalore-based theatre and visual artist. His practice is influenced by his Dalit identity, experience, and location. Dalit is the political identity of communities formerly known as untouchable and considered the lowest within the Hindu caste system, and thus oppressed by its discriminatory scriptures, social structures, and norms. The identity and history of his community and family inform the questions, topics, and medium that Vamsi engages with through his work. As a student of science, Vamsi's work is rooted in rigorous research. As the child of a writer, he has grown up around stories and finds that they are his route to not only entertain and educate, but to organize people and challenge hegemonic oppressive structures of power. As of August 2023, Vamsi has been the interdisciplinary artist in residence at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of the Arts and the Department of Asian Languages and Culture. Welcome, Vamsi, to the panel and to the conference. Rajyashri Goody is an artist based in India and Netherlands. Her art practice is informed by her academic background in sociology and visual anthropology and her Ambedkarite Dalit roots. She is interested in creating space and time for thinking through everyday instances of caste-based violence and Dalit resistance, and how elements like food, nature, language, and literacy are actively used as tools to enforce caste rules for generations. Goody incorporates various mediums in her practice: text, voice, paper pulp, ceramics, photography, printmaking, video, and installation. Rajyashri and Vamsi will be joining us from the same screen today. Welcome, Rajyashri. And then we have Sucharita. Sucharita Kanjilal is Assistant Professor of Anthropology, Bard College, New York, US. Her research examines the place of gender, caste, and religious nationalism in the growth of digital capitalism, combining anthropological and feminist perspectives on economic theory, media, and food. Her work has appeared in Gastronomica, Feminist Media Studies, Rutledge Companion to Caste and Cinema, Scroll.in, The News Minute, and Hindustan Times. We will have time for discussion afterwards, so please use the Q&A feature to send the panelists your questions, and we'll take them up in the end. Thank you. Shall we pass it on to the panelists? Vamsi, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anusha. Thank you, Samita. Thank you, Sucharita, for joining us. And of course, Rajyashri, who's been here. Yeah, before I start, I just want to sort of mull about, what time and space we are in. It's really, what does it mean to do art or, to have scholarship in times like this? It's important for us to actively acknowledge and think about that. I'll just quickly talk about one of my art performances today briefly. I have about 10 minutes. Is that it?
15.
Okay. I mean, I will not take so much of the time, but I would prefer to have conversation. So I'll quickly share something. Is it visible? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Again, as I said, my name is Vamsi, and I'm going to talk about my performance, Come Eat With Me. This is a wonderful illustration by this wonderful artist called Big Fat Bao, who has drawn me in during performance. This is a slide setup that I use during my performance. That's Ambedkar, and that is Gadar at the back. Gadar is, though he's not physically present, his songs are part of my performance. And that is sort of the start of where my performance goes. It talks about everyday objects like Gadar does, simple things like, food, rice, rasam, sambar, everyday notions of caste. And he sings it with a lot of love, compassion, and rage. Never in his songs he would not say that either of them are wrong, to have joy or rage. So my performance is a combination of that and also a tribute to Gadar. For everyone who doesn't know Gadar, Gadar is a singer, balladeer, poet, political activist, cultural activist, and he's a synonym to revolution, and that he is. Unfortunately, we lost him in 2023, August 6th. But my work continues to be a tribute to not just him, but everyone who works for liberation, especially for the caste oppressed. So about me, I mean, Samita has already covered that. So what is Come Eat With Me? Come Eat With Me is a performance piece that explores the relationship between caste and food, and it culminates in sharing a meal together. It focuses on Dalit relationships to food, and the piece sort of begins with personal stories, oral histories around food in my household, in community. And I use existing literature, academic writing, and sort of bring this complicated relationship between caste and food and try to unpack it with questions of oppression, solidarity, grief, joy, and everyday victories. Because oftentimes when we talk about caste, especially in South Asian context, only the brutalized body is sort of looked at. Only when a body is brutalized, you can look at its oppression. But during my performance, I try to use simple, regular human stories, because a favorite comedian of mine who says that all of us are having a human moment. If we can recognize that we are having that human moment, I think we can have lesser fights every day. So I share that human moment. So in the process of getting there, what happened is that I've done about 30 odd shows until now, but that was not the plan. The plan was that I do like 10 shows in Bangalore with small, intimate audiences and then just be done with it. But it has taken shape into this, I don't know what to call it. It has become this mutated thing right now where it has brought me to America. So how I got there, how I got to Come Eat With Me is that during the pandemic, I sort of got unemployed. I lost all my performances because I was a live performer. And then, like most unemployed people, I was like, I will write. I started writing my first play during the pandemic. I was part of this writing program called the Idea Development Lab by Indian Ensemble. It's a theater group based out of Bangalore. During that time, I started writing a play called Star in the Sky. Star in the Sky was about life and death of Rohit Vemula. As I was writing that play, I realized that it was not just about his life, but every caste marginalized students' lives in government education institutions. It was a story about me, my brother, my father, my grandfather, everyone. And it sort of opened doors to what all questions I could ask. Where does caste sort of play? Caste plays an important role in everything. It is a visceral, violent reality in especially the Indian context. So I started looking at where else I could do, and Come Eat With Me was an afterthought as a process of writing that play. I started looking at, why is there no history? Why is there no documentation? And certain images started coming to me. Like, for example, if you go to India, you see this pure veg restaurant. Okay, vegetarian is understandable. What is pure veg? What is this idea of putting the caste names on top of restaurants, like Brahman's coffee bar? This was one of the first questions that has come to my mind. And the other is, if you look at this needed Brahmin cook, need a Brahmin cook. This is something that I've seen on Facebook, especially during the pandemic, and how I recently moved to a gated community. It was not there, but in most places, especially in Bangalore, where I come from, there's a separate elevator that is used for maids, drivers, delivery boys. And this kind of urban segregation, people easily say that, oh, this is a choice, this is about cleanliness, but it is nothing but caste that is, flowing through your body. So I started like, okay, maybe if I ask people to, come eat with me with the food that I've cooked, how many of them will come? And it started with that basic question, and then it just grew into something else. So in the March of 2022, I put out this call called Come Eat With Me. It started off as a conversation about caste, food, and everything else, because I was a theater artist. I was looking at how do I use my medium as a theater artist to sort of, bring in the questions of caste and food. But it started with 5 people in a friend's apartment in Cooktown in Bangalore. And then it became 10 people, 20 people, and it just grew and grew. And as the performance grew, I sort of brought in more notions of theater and art. And as much as it is about caste and food, it became rules of art and who defines the rules, who breaks the rules of art. And then it brought me to America. Like someone on the internet saw my work and they were like, oh, this is interesting, and this can become an arsenal in the fight for caste protections in American universities. So I was invited to University of Wisconsin-Madison as the interdisciplinary artist in residence. And now I'm doing a tour of my performance called Come Eat With Me. In the US, I started, of course, I have done in Madison, where I am currently the artist in residence, but I've traveled to Emory, Stanford, San Francisco. I have a show tomorrow at UC Riverside, and hopefully I'll continue my shows at University of Texas, Austin, and Chicago Northwestern. But even when I continue to do it's largely successful, the questions of how is this theater? This is something that comes back to me, even though I talk about caste and food as part of my performance. As I said, it is about rules of art and how to break them. So it sort of becomes an important question, especially as an art practitioner, is how much do I push, and how much there's possibility to push, because immediate question that arises is that this is not theater. Maybe this is vanity, or maybe this is discourse about caste and food. But as much as it is, because at the end of the day, what is caste? It is notions of purity, right? It tells you that, oh, you are impure, you're more purer, your food is impure, or your food is more purer. And the same thing sort of translates to everything, your body, your art, your education, your scholarship. Everything is looked through from the lens of caste. And now I have decided that, I just, for the rest of my life, I will do Come Eat With Me, because it is, at the end of the day, it's I'm telling stories with people sitting with me. I could do this in old age as well. but what I have picked up and continue to do so is bring in more questions of what is sacred and what is not. Recently, I watched this film, Chamkila. It's about this Punjabi singer, Amar Singh Chamkila, and his partner, Amarjot Kaur. And the movie talks about how, he was attacked and he was cancelled, literally and figuratively, because of the vulgarity in his songs. But no one talks about who decides what is vulgar, or vulgarity is actually an antithesis to this purity of art. And I use food as that, way to sort of break that idea of what is pure and what is not. And that is my work. And I know some of you will join me tomorrow for the performance. And I'm hoping to continue doing this. Again, thank you for this, Anusha and Samita.
Thank you so much, Vamsi. For those of you who have registered and who are in Riverside, you'll be treated to a wonderful performance by Vamsi tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you there. For those of you who are not in town or not able to come, please be on the lookout for other performances in the US by Vamsi. Hopefully you can join them there, or as he said, he's going to be doing this performance until he's an old man, so hopefully you'll have another chance to see it at some point. Our next speaker is Rajyashri Goody. Hello.
Hi. We're just like switching. Hello. Thank you so much for this invitation. And I'm really happy to be in Riverside while we're doing it. I'll get started. Where is it? Here it is. That's not the first page, but Yeah, so my work is a sort of, I've been doing a lot of research around food and caste since around 2016, 2017, but mainly through Dalit literature. I got interested in how we speak about our own food practices, whether it's in my own family or in the larger Dalit community. And I kind of started recognizing in 2016 that we didn't really have any sort of conventional cookbooks as such. But what I did find was two books, Annaheya Purna Brahma, which is a Dalit cookbook, written by Shahu Patore, who's a journalist, and it's in Marathi. And in his recipes as well, he wrote down the recipes, but then he also sort of added his memories of the recipes to it. And I found that quite interesting, like having that addition of like, this is my experience of this food. Whereas in a conventional recipe book, of course, there are those things, but it's not required. And then there was also whose plate is it anyway? Yeah. Or isn't this plate Indian? Isn't this plate Indian, which was a 2008 study done by the then Women's Studies Center in Pune University, where a group, which incidentally I was also part of, but a few years later, but I had no idea because I wasn't, those weren't my research interests. And the participants of that project had done a lot of ground research on, recipes from Dalit households, but also they wrote about how important Dalit literature is, just because it mentions food so much, but also like it really, it's able to speak about our experiences with eating, with hunger, with the stomach in general, in a much more, say, like complex way than a conventional recipe book would. Also, they mentioned that, a recipe book is a thing of access. It's a recipe book assumes many things. It assumes that you can read and write, which is one thing that was denied to our community for a long, long time. So this generational like passing down of recipes that are possible in other communities is not necessarily the same in this. It assumes that you have like a full functioning like kitchen and utensils and ability to buy different ingredients. It also assumes, which perhaps is my most like interesting point in it, is it kind of assumes that you can, by cooking this recipe, you can possibly like experience another person's life or culture. And I find that quite fascinating as a person who also loves food. But also, how is that ever really possible? And in the context of caste, how does that sort of complicate things? So basically, these are like, this picture is just of different booklets that comprise recipes or poems. So whenever I read a Dalit autobiography or, a memory text or a memoir, I sort of underline whenever the writer talks about food, and I convert it into recipes, and I kind of just add that to the book. So the writing's not necessarily like I'm tweaking it, but the stories are still like true to the books that they're from. And it's just an ongoing work. I don't like rush with it really, but just depends on when I read a new book, then I might make a recipe book along with it. Let me see. Yeah, so I mean, this is sort of one of the recipes. I think this was from Sharon Kumar Limbai's book, but I'll check again. But it's called leg bone. It's keep your caste a secret, live as Lingayats, strictly vegetarian. When grandmother comes to visit, you might feel ashamed of her utter poverty. If she brings a bundle of 2 kilos of beef from the village and 2 pieces of leg bone, your favorite, get annoyed at her. Immediately shut the doors and windows of your house. She might pat your back, encourage you to eat. Who's going to see you? If someone comes to know about this, you might be exposed. Eat the meat late at night. After you take the bones and throw them away, feel relieved. In the morning, if you find the dogs chewing on these bones, try not to feel as if they are tearing pieces off you and eating you up. I'm pretty sure this is Sharan Kumar Limbai because of the way he uses his very strong metaphors. And so basically, yeah, they're sort of, I just converted a little bit. So whereas the writer would have written, we kept our caste a secret, we lived as Lingayats, and then my grandmother came. So I just kind of shifted, keep your caste a secret. If this happens, this might happen. There are impossibilities to the format that I find quite interesting to think through. But then along with the recipes, I also do ceramics, sort of that are loosely based on food and flowers and elements in nature, and especially bhakris. So this is one work I made a few years ago called Toran, just related to torans that I hung in front of doors. Yeah, this is another recipe about water. And although the well belongs to the Patils, the spades and shovels, the sweat, the explosives of the Mahars were used to dig and build it. You are the reason for water in the well, but now you're not allowed to draw water from it. If you're walking by feeling tired and thirsty, go down the well to drink water while your friends keep watch. Make sure no one sees you. Otherwise, you might be badly beaten. Quench your thirst furtively. Touch the water. Gather it in your cupped palms. Ripples might form on the surface. The water inside the earth might shake. And then this is a sort of an installation I made a few years ago with 10,000 of these little ceramic mounds that I called stupas. And sort of with the 10,000 together, I wanted to form this kind of strange ceramic water body that was just sort of shiny. And but I like the sort of inedible quality of these things. It might somehow look like food, or it might look like consumable in some way, but that's not possible. This is a work I did many years ago, but I still enjoy looking at it. And this was before I really started doing much ceramics. And this garland was based on this recipe, which was take out a dry stem of red chilies, buy salt from the village, grind the chilies and salt into a paste, fetch water, pour some into a small pot. Wash your dust-covered metal plates, sit down for your meal, eat dry loaves of bhakri with chili paste, drink pots of water. So this garland was just big bits of rock salt, black salt and this pink salt, and just dried chilies. And it was very heavy to hold, and I did this sort of durational performance with a bunch of people, them just trying to hold it for 7 minutes. These are also my ceramic bhakris, and they were sort of the first things I started making in ceramics. Especially, I think this image is, this was also by Lim. I guess this is all about Limbai, this presentation, but the Marathi one is here and the English one is here, but it's Bhakar is, oh God, I can't read my own. Bhakar is as large as man. Bhakar is as infinite as the sky. Bhakar is as bright as the sun. Hunger is bigger than man. Hunger is vaster than the 7 circles of hell. Man is only ever as big as Bhakar, as big as hunger. These are just sort of old works, but just trying to think through also this, the notion of the Bhakar is so connected to hunger, to pain, to but also elevating it to something so beautiful. And these were just ceramic Bhakars. And then also I do like, I involve my own family photographs in these sort of narratives, looking at our own photos of enjoying food, of just like having birthday parties and stuff, as also, this is also a narrative of a Dalit food experience. And it includes joy, it includes like eating well. And because I didn't want to just sort of, even the recipes, it's not like they're all depressing. They have a lot of joy in them as well. But I also wanted to share my photographs as this, like, you know, these are our personal photos, but they're all like, because our communities have not necessarily had access to cameras and technology like that until like a bit later, perhaps, than more privileged communities. Then how does that, like, what do we tell stories about? And actually, perhaps there's the same. Perhaps just want to take photographs at birthdays, at celebrations, while we're enjoying ourselves. So I sort of pulled in my own family photos to like play with that. And these are more ceramics. Again, like, it's just sort of letting my own like understanding of like these experiences also open up a bit. This was a Bhakar heart that I made like last year. Just thinking about also like pilgrimage and what we carry on pilgrimage to Buddhist sites, pilgrimage, and yeah, something about the Bhakar that can be carried, that can be like kept close. And then this is the last exhibition, like the installation I've made in DC right now, which is called Losing All Taste. It's like, yeah, hundreds of elements that come together. Like also like my overturned bowls, like stupas, different kinds of bhakris, like stones, like things that look like meat, petals. I mean, I'm also like just opening up this experience, because it's not really about the food. It's about like navigating everyday life when something like caste is looming over you. And that does include food, that does include nature, that does include like your body moving through this, and also how you process them inside your body. So I guess I'm trying to find ways to like bring my ceramics into that. And then I thought I'd just end with this this poem called Song that I just found this morning. As father carried stones upon his head, the headman twirling his mustaches used to say, "Hey, Kisnya, let's have a first-rate lavdi." And my father would sing with his tattooed throat. In his song, there was the moon and the sun and flowers blossoming, sea waves, an impassioned girl drunk with love. Sweat-stained hands clapped. There was applause all around. My father was touched, was filled with gratitude. Walking home, he groped towards the song of bread that he never could sing. Translated by Bilas Sarang. Anyway, that's it. Thank you. Pass it on.
Thank you, Rajyashri. I hope that How long is your exhibition in DC up for, or is it
Oh,
permanent?
yeah. It's on until like mid-August. So it's
Okay.
at the National Museum for Women in the Arts. And many of my recipe booklets are also there, and also this ceramic installation. Thanks.
Okay. I hope anyone who's on the East Coast is able to
Please,
see it,
that
and
would be great.
I can
Yeah.
go and see it in person at the
Amazing.
only ever seen the images of your work, and even the images are so evocative and stunning, and I can only imagine what seeing it in person
I'm
it
so
would be
glad.
like. So
Thank
yeah, I
you.
encourage you all if you can to go to DC and see that work. And your work is also displayed in India, or is not anymore?
Not right now. Not right
Not right now.
now.
Not
Yeah.
right.
Thanks.
All right. Well, yes. If you want to drop in the chat any links, both you and Vamsi, about how to if people want to stay connected to you and your work, what the best way to do that is, feel free to drop those links in the chat. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Sucharita Kanjilal. Take it away.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. And I wanted to thank the organizers of the conference, and also just what an honor and privilege it is to be invited to speak here, especially among people whose work I so admire and learn from. I'm not an artist, so my offering here is a modest little talk, a little paper. That was based in part on my own observations as I did my research as an anthropologist in India who works with food media content creators primarily. And in part, the paper is based on my own positionality as a Savarna woman. I'm going to start with a story that some of you in the audience might have read. It came out in the News Minute. And then maybe just raise a few questions about what food specifically can tell us about caste, especially in this historical moment. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. So there's a story in my family, always told and retold till laughter guaranteed. My maternal uncle, famously mischievous, age 10, was on his yearly summer vacation to his grandmother's sprawling home in West Bengal. Dida, as my uncle and their cousins called her, was famously Brahminical, age 70. No meat products, no onions, nor any kind of garlic ever crossed the threshold of her house. The estate's floors would be cleansed with Ganga jal, Ganga water, when workers of other castes came through, collecting garbage, picking up laundry, carrying mishti. Workers who did all the tasks that reproduced Dida's Brahmin home into a beautiful vacation spot for her visiting gaggle of grandchildren. On these trips, my uncle was up to no good. One afternoon, tired of the elaborate but strictly garlic-free meals that were being served in Dida's kitchen, he snuck off to the local sweet shop and filled up his 10-year-old belly with chicken roll and fish chops. Upon his return, he climbed into Dida's bed and said, "Dida, I'm so full. Will you rub my tummy for me?" And so she did. And a few minutes into Dida's hand laying upon his happy protuberant stomach, my uncle seized his moment. He says, "Dida, do you know what my stomach's full of? Chicken roll, fish chop." The scandalized Dida took flight, rushing towards the bathroom, shouting, "Hey Ram, hey Ram." She bathed not just her hand, but her entire body, head through toe, in that same Ganga jal. All the cousins were giggling. We got her. The chicken roll and the fish chops were, of course, inside my uncle and his grandmother outside him. But everyone participating in and later recounting this prank was very intimately aware of how caste rules of touch had been broken. This unique texture of touch was, after all, the crux of the joke. Just as Dida and my uncle knew, so too was I taught in turn this way of knowing, this way in which touch is mediated by Savarna, dominant caste, Hindu bodies. The layers of flesh that were separating my uncle from his Dida were not sufficient to protect her from caste contamination. In the past year, two similar stories about this notional touch of caste have circulated tumultuously in the news. The first features another elderly Brahmin woman, the business personality Sudha Murthy, who claimed in this video that she carried her own food with her when she traveled abroad because one of her biggest fears was that the same spoon might be used for vegetarian and non-vegetarian dishes. Several months later, the gig-based delivery platform Zomato announced that it would launch separate fleets for delivering vegetarian and so-called non-vegetarian foods. Both incidents prompted a lot of online debate, with many people noting correctly that caste norms around meat eating and ritual purity were at stake here. But many others, especially Savarna folks, were quick to gloss over the caste angle, insisting that this was just a way of enacting people's cultural preferences and a matter of personal choice. Reading these incidents together suggests that the embodied and affective experiences of alarm in Dida's case, or fear in Murthy's case, or customer satisfaction or something in Zomato's case, far exceed a matter of personal choice about meat eating. In fact, all of these incidents have very little to do with the actual consumption of meat or actually eating it. Instead, we might look at the long anti-caste literature, starting with Ambedkar, to learn about how the body politics of food and meat in India are always intimately and sometimes violently mediated through caste. These dietary norms are not exclusive to Brahmins, but are also embodied by others from dominant caste groups, Savarnas, who have historically taken up Brahminical prescriptions themselves. And while the particular norms might differ and even change based on group, region, generation, other factors, what remains common is the common sense around touch that endures in very different ways across space and time. And importantly, it rarely needs to be stated explicitly in words. And therein lies the rub. So this short talk draws on a methodological approach that I call Savarna disclosure, to explain how caste is engendered or caste emerges in encounters between food, bodies, and space. Instances of Savarna disclosure, I suggest, are those brief moments when dominant caste ideas are openly expressed during moments of caste intimacy, usually. In a contemporary time where people instead, Savarna folks instead try to elide, obscure, or re-signify caste as anything but caste, especially in public conversations. As an anthropologist who works on questions of food, media, and capital in India, an ongoing ethnographic puzzle was very few of my Savarna interlocutors would ever mention their caste explicitly in our conversations about food. While a few people might state that they are vociferously anti-caste, most others would say when asked that they were, in a general sense, against caste or that caste has no place in progressive Indian society. Some would say they are simply beyond caste altogether, or that it was something that existed in the past, or that they did not, in fact, know or even care what their caste was. Yet, whether they stated it explicitly or not, my interlocutors and I have frequently shared knowledge about how caste inhabits our Savarna bodies. If I tell the family story about my uncle's chicken roll belly rub, everyone gets the joke, everyone laughs. And such instances of Savarna disclosure can help make sense of this paradoxical nature of caste as something that is often viscerally felt, but pointedly unnamed in Savarna conversations about food. Caste, in this sense, must be understood as an affective regime, something that is socially learned, but corporeally experienced, as desire, as intimacy, as odium, as disgust. And this becomes especially evident in encounters between bodies, food, and space. If we understand that caste operates not as an ironclad set of rules or stipulations, or even some kind of primordial or unchanging identity category, if we can see that caste is a set of practices as an affective regime, then we can make sense of how caste-based dietary norms endure because they're ephemeral, because they're fluid and adaptive. Moreover, attending to caste as it is felt rather than as it is told helps us analyze more critically claims by Savarna interlocutors in particular that treat caste as some kind of relic of the past or insignificant to their lives just because they don't talk explicitly or need to talk explicitly about it or be interested in it. That caste operates as an affective regime is crucial to understanding the ongoing politics of meat in India, and of course the term non-veg itself, which centers kind of Brahminical ideas of normativity. The historical link between caste, meat, and vegetarianism probably bears no repeating at this conference, and I will not use this time to kind of prove that link, but rather we could look at how the practice of vegetarianism becomes entangled in caste despite its multiple contradictory, even uneven relationship to particular rules about eating. So take my own interlocutors who were kind of split across many parts of India. Many of them call themselves strict or pure vegetarians, as Vamsi mentioned. Some differed on what they considered veg and what they considered non-veg. Some eat garlic, but not onions, eggs, but not mushrooms, chicken, but not beef, the gravy, but not the chicken. Some consider food cooked outside their house as non-veg, but would eat mutton if the goat was slaughtered in a temple. What's key here is that the individual foods or even the individual caste attachments, identities do not themselves determine how the line between veg and non-veg is drawn. Rather, this line is internalized and maintained by what Ambedkar has called the force of custom. And here the force of custom is an affective, sensory, and spatial regimentation through which caste's body politics are enacted. So-called non-veg food becomes about caste as soon as it threatens to touch the body through all the senses, not merely through direct tactile contact or even the act of consumption. Savarna bodies sense meat through their eyes. When they recoil from a photo or picture of beef, caste tingles under the skin when someone brushes the non-veg spoon against a vegetarian dish. Office workers and college students feel the miasma of meat in the common dining hall, in the shared microwave. States try to ban meat-based food from public view and eggs from sharing a schoolroom with pure vegetarian children. Years before it tried to roll out its segregated delivery mechanism, Zomato had added a veg-only button to its online ordering system, and the word beef is often disguised visually in menus as either meat or tenderloin or B***F. Public encounters with food which are shot through with these hegemonic politics of vegetarianism are policed and regimented not through modes of actually eating, but through much broader visual and synesthetic experiences managed through caste logics. And by synesthetic, I refer to this experience of how one kind of sense perception, sight, sound, or smell might activate a different one. And in this case, sight, sound, and smell activates caste's all-important sense of touch. And here I'm talking about Sundar Sarukai's theorization of touch, which as a ritual or moral sense, a sense that is felt not when the physical distance is breached, but a moral distance between two caste-marked bodies or objects is breached. And those who were born and raised in Savarna families know this moral quality of touch intimately. When Dida washes her whole body after touching my uncle's tummy, she's seeking to scrub off the clinging sensation of ritual impurity, of moral rupture. And this tacky touch of caste, in Murthy's case, can linger even after a spoon once polluted by meat has been washed. However, this sticky synesthetic experience of caste is not limited, importantly, to meat alone. In fact, many Brahmins will proudly tell you that they eat meat, and this is evidence that they are somehow beyond caste. But caste's affective touch persists in more than just meat. One key example is the tensions about food that arise between Savarna folks and their caste others when they meet in space, and especially in domestic space. Anthropologists and sociologists have long studied the inside-outside oppositions that structure domestic space in Hindu homes, and also the many ways that this binary opposition is breached and exceeded. The boundaries of the home are not, after all, static, and closed people and food transgress those boundaries every day. Yet for Savarna Indians, a sense of caste anxiety often reveals itself when it comes to conversations about food prepared outside the home. Ghar ka khana, or home-cooked food, is afforded a very high ritual, moral, and social value when compared with food found in settings of public dining. The idea that home-cooked food, ghar ka khana, is fundamentally better, superior, more nutritious, and of a higher quality than food cooked outside is not some abstract notion or aesthetic judgment. It's materialized in the body and made to seem commonsensical because of its place in caste society. Consider this incident that was recounted to me by a Brahmin doctor in Pune. And now I'm telling his story, Abhay's story. He says, my cousin Shobha was visiting me for a weekend as we were preparing dinner. I suggested that instead of making rotis, I could go outside and buy some from a shop down the street. I knew that this place makes really delicious rotis that are made on hot coal. After dinner, I put the leftover rotis away and thought that we would eat them for breakfast. However, the next morning, the rotis were gone. I asked Shobha in Marathi where the rotis went, and she told me that she had thrown them in the dustbin. I asked her why, since they were perfectly good rotis. And as we were having this conversation, our maid, our domestic worker, was sweeping the floor in the same room. Shobha immediately switched to English, nodded towards her and said, "The rotis had that smell. You know the smell that you get from their bodies? I can't tolerate that smell, so I threw them out." Notice how in this instance of Savarna disclosure, caste is not explicitly mentioned or named, yet Abhay knew that both he and I would immediately recognize the sensory spatial logics of caste at play as he recounted this anecdote. What is important here is how Shobha describes the supposed smell that she associates with certain bodies, which she believes has now attached itself somehow to the food that these bodies might prepare. There is no real way for Shobha to know the caste of either the cook who prepared the rotis nor the cleaner who works at Abhay's house, except her tacit knowledge that these jobs have historically been performed by non-Brahmins, and in the case of cleaners, especially by Dalits. But Shobha describes these domestic interlopers, and by extension, the interloping roti, as having a profound effect on her body, a feeling of revulsion that she cannot apparently tolerate. This smell is not the smell of the roti itself, but rather the smell of caste's touch. The bodily premium placed on home-cooked food or untouched spoons or smell-free rotis is reflected back in veg-only food delivery, in transgressive chicken rolls, and in the fear of foreign restaurants. All of these incidents around food raise important questions about how to understand caste, and especially the sticky endurance of caste, despite its malleability, its changing historical character, and ongoing efforts to re-signify caste as anything but caste. Why drag caste into it? In contemplating what caste is, Babasaheb Ambedkar famously called caste a form of social odium, from which whole classes of people suffer, an inward feeling of defilement and contempt. The flip side of social odium, I suggest, is the Savarna experience of caste intimacy, the comfortable, unmarked feeling of being in Savarna spaces free from social odium. Savarna bodies are made and remade in space by navigating and mitigating social odium on the one hand to secure and protect caste intimacy on the other. These corporeal experiences far exceed the question of food and extend into every other aspect of life, marriage being the main corollary, but also things like educational spaces or workplaces. Caste then is an ever creative but stubborn way of managing and regulating bodily desire. Creative insofar as the specific rules are changeable and frequently broken, but stubborn in that the feeling of social odium or intimacy are structured into familiar ways of being and knowing. Though the incidents involving Shobha, Sudhamurthy, and Dida span nearly 5 generations, they offer important insights about how food can help us think in flexible terms about what caste really is in a caste-based society. A great deal of work and creative bodily fashioning goes into maintaining Dida's and Shobha's homes as spaces of caste intimacy. What this tells us is that being Savarna is not simply some fixed identity that one is born with, but rather that caste is a social practice that is learned at the level of bodily desire. And if the corporeal experiences and spaces of caste intimacy are made and marked and protected, they can also be unmade and challenged and changed. To see caste this way allows us to repoliticize Savarna bodily practices amidst efforts to depoliticize them into something seemingly neutral, like cultural practice or personal preference. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I've really enjoyed reading your work as well. So I appreciate hearing you speak about it today, and such meaningful overlaps between all of your work. And just, I wrote down, a number of ways that what caste is, right? Caste is a visceral, violent reality. That's from Vamsi. Caste is this idea of flowing through your body. This idea that people, dismiss caste as being just cultural or personal choice, but thinking about caste as an affective regime, as enduring yet evasive, as force of custom, as synesthetic, a kind of sensory spatial logic, and this way that you're thinking about kind of the sticky endurance of caste. Sucharita was really helpful. So I really appreciated all of your contributions. While we wait for people to kind of use the Q&A function to post their questions, I did want to ask a question of all of you, and also see if you had questions for each other, since some of you know each other, some of you just met, but maybe are familiar with each other's work. But I did want to ask about, this is something that Rajyashri and Vamsi and I kind of started talking about yesterday, but I think it would be helpful to hear again, and also to hear your thoughts, Sucharita, about what your kind of chosen medium. You all have different mediums that you're working with. Vamsi with theater, Rajyashri with many different media, including kind of ceramics and pulp and text, and then you, Sucharita, with kind of digital media. What does that allow you to say about caste and its relationship to food? So yeah, I wondered if you could talk about your specific medium and what that enables you to kind of say about this relationship between caste and the body, or caste and food. Yeah, Vamsi and Rajyashri, if you wanted to weigh in.
I raised my hand for a very different reason. After listening to Sucharita, I realized that I wanted to show images of my performance, which I didn't get to. If you have a minute, I want to quickly show
sure.
that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. We have time.
So this is like the setup of how I start my performance. I sit on a chair. There are books. There's Ambedkar. There's a dapu. But the image that I'm really interested in is how my performance ends, is where we bring in the food, and everyone sort of, they go around, they start eating the food, and the image of this inter-dining, like I subvert the idea of that. But these people serve their food, they, all the handles touch. People are, very close to each other. They don't know, of course, they don't know each other's caste. But this whole idea of, it's also really interesting. I find it extremely funny that, people would come, oh, this is important, but they go back home and they are like, oh, can I not use your spoon? I don't want to eat from your plate. I will eat on my, so yeah, this image sort of, it always stays with me. And as much as I love my performance, I know the best part is the eating of food together, because, people can get really squeamish about it. Yeah, I just, thank you for your piece, Sucharita. Like so many things that I could relate to. Yeah, I stopped there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm realizing, Vamsi, that you're also a choreographer in many ways, that you're not just, I saw your performance in Madison, but I hadn't thought about the choreography of the way that the food is set up, and people moving together and gathering together in that space. So yes, truly an interdisciplinary artist. You definitely have that earned that title. But yeah, I wanted to see if that question about your chosen medium, and we were talking yesterday about the kind of edible and inedible aspects of your works, Rajyashri and Vamsi, and then the digital. I'm just thinking about like all of the affective parts of the digital, right? There's the sight, but the kind of touch or the smell or the, all of that is not there in the digital, and yet how affect really plays a key role even in the digital sphere. So yeah, any thoughts on that would be lovely.
No, I think that's sort of been quite an interesting way to like navigate that is because I did start with recipe, and that still continues this like very personal like thing of like reading this book and then like processing it through these recipes. But then I also, for me, it's interesting, like for a person to just hold the recipe book and hold like just read it quietly, you know, to themselves. I think that for me is that experience of like sort of processing whatever's going on, and then they can approach it in their own way because I'm just sort of giving them like a few prompts, but it's open to sort of, in the end, the readers sort of making the decision. And then also with the ceramics, it was sort of, yeah, it was difficult to, as much as like literature and writing and also this understanding of like literacy that allows us to sort of share experiences, to like spread something beyond ourselves, is it was also a very like cerebral, like it was just in my head and processing it just like through myself, and I felt like writing it just wasn't enough, and the ceramics sort of allowed me to process it in a kind of yeah, in a bodily manner like that. But at the same time, I think it's that like I don't know, hinting at perhaps these like hinting at an experience of hunger, or hinting at an experience of possibly shame, or even hinting at an experience of joy, but not necessarily being able to consume it, is where I'm kind of interested in. Like, this is a recipe, you can read it, but you can't actually cook with it. Or this is a, like, this could maybe look like a bhakri, maybe not, but also you can't really consume it. But, and yet it kind of stays, like it has this longevity, like more than something like food would deteriorate. And but also like yeah, thinking about how the audience will deal with the materiality. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And this idea that what you were talking about earlier in your talk about recipe books, if there were, you know, a lot of Dalit recipe books, the idea that you could just consume another culture by cooking its recipe. And I think your work really resists that idea that you can just consume another culture through these means, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Vamsi or Sucharita?
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, especially with Rajyashri's work and mine, I feel like, again, this is, I'm thinking about it retrospectively. I'm very against structure, like, because caste is a structure that is pushed down upon you. Starting from there, and with Ambedkar, you know, I would like things to be very non-structural, but at the end of my performance is also built in a structure. So I look at it as structure and anti-structure, you know, with by breaking down the formality of space, especially because I chose the medium of theater. The reason for me to choose that is because that's what I excel at. I excel at telling stories. But I also wanted to be like, okay, how many rules can I break? You know, not just theater, but also with respect to audience interaction, breaking the fourth wall. With, okay, how do we eat food? Like a lot of places, especially in America, when I say that let's bring food in the middle and keep, there are, you know, issues of, okay, the food has to be kept hot. There are many questions, but, you know, I try to sort of break away from that as much as possible. Like, I know that I need to keep it, you know, there needs to be some order because otherwise it'll be chaotic. But how much space do I have in that breaking of rules? And I really thrive on breaking of that rule. So if someone asks me what is the medium, I say that anti-medium is my medium. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just to jump in on that medium question, you know, I really loved, Rajyashri, when you were talking about the kind of place of the Dalit cookbook, and the fact that there isn't, you know, there aren't very many of them, and in some of my previous work, I kind of traced the recipe writing tradition in the kind of Indian, from the British colonial cookbook, the first real mass produced cookbooks, not the cookbooks of Mughal emperors and stuff, which was not for common people to consume. And then you start seeing who are the people who start writing cookbooks after the British, right? It's Savarna men and women who have access to the printing press, not just, so they have access to language writing, and then access to the same presses from which, independence movement writings were coming out, were also then printing periodicals and women's journals. But they are, folks like the Tagore family will put out cookbooks. And then it starts to change a little bit, around the time of Madhur Jaffrey and these people. They're still very elite folks. And then you get television medium, and it's still Tarla Dalal and Sanjeev Kapoor. And then you would imagine that with the digital, something changes, right? Because now everyone, in theory, can write recipes. And something does change in the sense that if you see, and the media matters a lot. If you look at Instagram, you will still find a lot of elite folks writing recipes because it's written, ultimately, Instagram, it requires a lot of writing and text. If you look at YouTube, the vernacular YouTube allows for people to share recipes not in a written tradition. And so you get a much broader range of recipes being shared. But at the same time, if you're trying to make money out of this, content creators succeed, by and large, Savarna content creators succeed in these kinds of spaces. And in no small part because of that affective response that folks get if they share recipes. And it's not just beef, right? Beef becomes the one thing that people talk about, but it's all kinds of things. It's different parts of animals that are otherwise eaten, or even just the labor it takes to delete all kinds of angry comments from your page if you posted something that disgusts your audience, which then immediately kind of funnels content creators into saying, it's not worth it for me to post about things because it takes a lot of time to make these videos. It takes a lot of time to write a recipe. Especially if you want to write a recipe that people can try to cook and try to inhabit your culture in some way, and it's such an important provocative point. And so even with the digital, it gets kind of funneled into, once again, more elite forms of trying to even preserve, like what are the food cultures people want to preserve, is a really politically loaded question. And whose food cultures are people trying to preserve, right? Is it their own families? Are they trying to go to the next village to a new frontier to find recipes to kind of grab and store? So it does raise a lot of questions.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions in the chat, and actually there's one question for each of you. So I'm going to read all of those questions. So for Rajyashri, the question is about, the person says, I wish I could go see the work in person. What is the darker soil looking material under that work at the National Museum for Women Artists? Also, what's the significance of the placement of the ceramics within a circle? I apologize if I missed that description. And then for Sucharita, the question is Garka Khana also a way to sustain the gender role of women to cook food? And then for Vamsi, when doing your performances outside of India, what kind of reactions do the participants' audience have who might have never heard about caste before? So in whatever order you want to answer those questions is fine.
Sure, I can answer. Thank you, Janet. I'm not sure which work you're talking at the NMWA. Basically, that was probably black clay ceramics. So they're just like dark brown or black clay ceramic, like clay that I was making bhakris or rotis out of. I think that's the one we're referring to. But also there were petals that I was making out of like really dark blue oxide. So perhaps in those images, they're not very great. Yeah, but it's sort of, I mean, part of them are kind of guesswork as sort of seeing what comes out of it, and also kind of imagining this to be something it's not, or playing with that. And definitely, I think the circle has been quite an important symbol in my work, both in terms of, I guess, this like gathering of food, and somehow, no, I mean, it doesn't always have to be a circle, but there is this like imagination to that. But also, I like the circle and like the flatness of a circle as opposed to like the sort of triangular nature of like caste hierarchy, and sort of like rather than kind of something at the top and many things at the bottom, sort of just like this like flatness and this, I don't know, symbolism towards this kind of equality. And I also find I'm doing a lot of work with stupas, with circles now. And that I think relates to, yeah, like my family and my personal sort of understanding of Buddhism, and just trying to like also think about Buddhist aesthetics, Dalit aesthetics. The circle is also such a universal form, you know, just like food. Just I like playing with that. People sort of come together and look at it like together. But it changes. It changes from time to time. You know.
Yeah, to address the Ghar Ka Khana question, and I think a subsequent question that really is related to kind of gender, caste. I think that if you look at the kind of, you know, if you read your kind of caste scholarship, you know, the two ways that caste is upheld is food and marriage. And so it comes together beautifully in the concept of Ghar Ka Khana. You know, the idea that even just this phrase, which is almost a terminology that Indians use, it's not a phrase that exists in the same way in other parts of the world, right? That it's its own idiom, Ghar Ka Khana. And in part has very much to do with how the Hindu home, the Hindu Brahminical home, achieves its kind of completed status once the heterosexual marriage within endogamous, you know, caste community marriages happen, which is why the home kitchen becomes such a privileged kind of space. On the one hand, you know, and so it's always gendered, and it's not just gender, but sexuality is a kind of part of that. And so it's not just home cooked food that is the highest ritual value, right? So if you have, you know, the pictures that Vamsi shared of wanting a Brahmin cook in their house, in people's homes. But even the food by the Brahmin cook is not necessarily the highest value. It's the food cooked by your wife or mother or grandmother. So the cook might prepare food for everyday cooking. And then the minute there's a ritual, a puja, a festival, you want that food cooked by, you know, the married women of the house, the non-menstruating married women. You know, it really adds on like that. That film, The Great Indian Kitchen, I think, does a great job of showing caste and gender together and how they are enforced in order to produce the kind of ideal Brahminical home. So yeah, Ghar Ka Khana is always you know, is very gendered.
There was a question about the diaspora. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah.
And then
So-
Vamsi, you wanted to jump in, yeah.
Well, Harita, right? Yeah, Harita, hi. Thank you for the question. I think there are two kinds of reactions. First reaction is that, oh, we didn't know that caste is still a thing. We thought it was and it takes a lot of deal to sort of make them realize that this is a reality now. That is the first thing. And the second thing, for people who understand caste little, their immediate reaction is that, oh, we didn't know. We didn't know that this is how it reacts and this is how food, you know. And then the third kind is mostly, you know, the diaspora people who, you know, who come and talk to me are like, yeah, this is very much a reality, but not in the US. These are the three kind of reactions that I get. But I was sharing this with Anusha and Samita yesterday. One of a social worker from America, they listened to my performance. They were at the performance and they come to me and they're like, throughout your performance, I didn't ever question any of the things that you were telling. But when I'm here and I work with mostly African American folks or Latinx communities, every time they tell me a story, I sort of, at least if not loud, at least in my mind, I start to question, oh, did this really happen? Or is this a reality? I think I would want that reaction with most people for everything, like to take this, to accept that this is a reality that one lives through. And I hope that that becomes a reaction in the future as well.
Thank you. Just noticing in the chat. Someone is asking if your performances are available via live stream, then Vamsi, but I think that's not possible, right?
You need to eat together, so
Yes.
online we can't do that.
Okay. And then we have just a thought, a comment, not a question necessarily, but I'm in the diaspora and there are so many seemingly elusive ways that casteist food notions have even entered non-South Asian vegan discussions in North America, and even the idea of not eating beef in Black American hip hop culture. So I don't know, I think a related question about veganism, I think there's, I've heard from folks like, is it possible to have a anti-caste animal rights politics? Are those incompatible? Is Dalit veganism like a contradiction, or is it a possibility, right? There's this sort of debate that is an animal rights politics compatible with an anti-caste politics? And so I think that's sort of a follow-on. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I could it's interesting. We were speaking about it as like also this idea of like, oh, sorry, this keeps, what is Dalit food? And I mean, my family is vegetarian for the most part now, since the conversion to Buddhism, especially also before that. Ambedkar really encouraged and forced people in his community to stop eating meat from a dead animal, just because it was placing you and it's like horrific as a practice. So yeah, we live in a Buddhist neighborhood that mostly everybody eats like vegetarian food, but there is still like this sort of like silent practice of eating like chicken or mutton or fish, but not beef anymore. And it's interesting being in that space and looking at also vegetarianism, or like trying to be vegetarian as a Buddhist ideal and not necessarily something that's conforming to Brahminical ideas of vegetarianism. And I think both can definitely, like for me, it's not like, I guess that's where it becomes interesting. It's like dal and rice is as much, it can be a Dalit food as much as something else. And that's okay. They're all kind of ways to kind of figuring out like what works for us as we like try and move towards castelessness. Like, but I think it's very interesting because my mom is really like, don't eat meat anymore. Don't eat meat anymore. Like, why are you doing this to your body? And she's not coming from a Brahminical perspective at all. She's thinking about the environment. She's thinking about just like the idea of killing an animal. She's thinking about like how my health is being affected. So it's very interesting, like, to think through that, but also, yeah, it's just a, idea.
Yeah, and in like, I come from, so I don't come from Madison. I'm living in Madison currently. And Madison is cheese and beer are the the most important things. It's a big dairy state. And randomly on hoardings, I see this, not your mother, not your milk. Now, if I were to translate that to Indian context, Gai hamari mata hai, like
Your
cow
mother
is-
and your milk.
yeah, cow is our mother. But it's interesting because in a lot of vegans have been behind my back. Like, you have to talk about veganism in your performance. I'm like, no, I will not, for various reasons. But the language about veganism in India, especially right now, sort of just copies what Western, influencers are talking about. Because in India, you have to look at that about 70% of children below the age of 12 are malnutritioned. And if you look at what is the cheapest form of protein, two things: one is egg, and the other is beef. Like, by banning cow slaughter, there's a huge hit on already very troubled, overworked, under-resourced health systems in India. So, this, and when people often misconstrue the idea of not eating beef in terms of, of course, the larger right-wing Hindu nationalist fascist government wants to be like, cow is our mother, you are hurting our religious sentiments. But if you also look at India is one of the largest producers of beef. And they have the companies which sell beef have very Islamic names. But if you look at all the owners of these establishments, they're either Jains or UP Thakurs or Brahmins, the Bhumiyars. Like, so it's interesting that, the language is a certain way of hurting religious sentiments, but the outcome or the output is very, very different. And it's interesting that the vegans are taking the language from the West, but, there's also some articulations around how to navigate. Like, for example, people often, and Ambedkar talks about this, like, this vegetarianism has always been a struggle between Brahmanism and Buddhism. Like, Buddhism said one thing, and in order to counter it, Brahmanism had to come up with various ideas of, oh, cow hamari mata hai, like, we have to, it's prosperous to have a cow, which was very, Buddhist ideology, and many rulers sort of made sure that this happened. So it's often, there's so much nuance that it's difficult for people to always bring in the nuance. So it's often lost in this nuance translation.
I think the question often becomes what to eat or what not to eat. And people hope that the answer will be found. If I just stop eating this, then, I'm on the right track or I'm doing it right. But I think from all these three presentations, it's much more a question of how than what. And what even counts, is meat eating in the kind of undernourished global South the same as factory meat in the US? They're two completely different things, right? They're not even the same meat. The meat itself is different. And so, do vegan practices differ? Ethiopian vegans have a completely different practice of veganism. Jamaican Rastafari traditions, totally different practice of veganism. But I think it becomes worrying when, the Brahminical becomes recoded as animal rights welfare or
Progressive animal rights.
Yeah, exactly. And animal rights at the cost of human rights or human life. And then the kind of, or if vegans in the West start adopting and purity politics and the bodily politics of the foreigner, and which they do, the disgust kind of, oh,
Shame, yeah.
The shame, the disgust. And so all of these practices are always borrowing from each other, and it's kind of, one has to be kind of politically attentive to the how of it, I think.
Yeah, there was also one more question. If no one wants to, I want to actually sort of talk about it.
Please.
The question is, this is slightly tangential, but the issue of Brahmin cook raises a question for me. Do you get relatively poor Brahmins as well? Isn't caste closely mirrored by economic status in India? I mean, I'm not sure if I understood the question, but I'm I'm going to assume certain things. Like giving opportunity to poorer Brahmins is not a question at all, because the idea for looking for a Brahmin cook is because they offer food that is pure, because their hands make it. And caste is notions of purity, whose hands can produce pure food and impure food. But again, caste is not related to economic status at all, because in India, you can go upper class, but you can't go upper caste. Once you're born in a caste, you die in a caste. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think one more, way to think about that is caste and class are not interchangeable. And of course, but there's a lot of correlation between them because of kind of how power has been held. But this question of seeking out a Brahmin in the first place, the only reason to do that is caste. But one place where then you might find a poor Brahmin is often a poor Brahmin widowed woman or a poor Brahmin unmarried woman. And she's poor because she's unmarried, right? And so that was certainly the case kind of in my households growing up. In my grandma's house, they would employ a Brahmin cook, but it was a woman who had to work as a cook because she was not experiencing class mobility through marriage. So again, it kind of comes back to, the gender, marriage, food, cooking questions are always tied up in each other.
Wow, this has been such an amazing conversation, and I'm so thrilled that we got so much time to discuss with you. I want to say a huge thanks to our speakers today. A huge thanks to all of you for attending this panel. I also want to just point out our next panel in the conference is actually not this coming Friday, but the following Friday on Caste and Touch, which will feature Royona Mitra, Meena Kandaswamy, and Akhil Kang, who will be speaking about the relationship between caste and touch, and follow on very nicely from this conversation, which we've already begun to kind of speak about the relationship between caste and food and touch as well. So you can check out the rest of our upcoming events in the Caste and Corporeality conference at our website, which hopefully, Samita, you can drop in the chat, casteandcorporeality.wordpress.com. I also want to just signal a conversation that's happening also on Zoom on April 30th at 12 p.m. on Pinky Hota, who was one of our conference speakers, panelists last week. Her book, The Violence of Recognition, Adivasi Indigeneity and Anti-Dalitness in India, is a brilliant book, and we'll have a full book talk with her on April 30th at 12 p.m. And then lastly, those who, I'll just drop that link into the chat real quick. That's the link for Pinky Hota's talk on the 30th. And yeah, lastly, for everyone who is registered to come to Vamsi's performance, I look forward to seeing you there tomorrow. It is outside, so bring something warm and bring a empty stomach so you can enjoy the food. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Yeah, lovely to hear everybody's perspectives on this. So good. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. All right, take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.